mentioned, we're getting ready to do our first essay, which is exciting, and it is the sensory essay. So we're going to talk about that. So first of all, I want to make sure that everyone knows what is expected. So be sure to read page 139 to 153 in the Longman Writer. That has a lot to do with the discussion board questions this week, so be sure to do that. And respond to the week 2 discussion board questions. The final draft of essay 1 is due by the end of this week. That's Sunday by 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So your time, not my time, but it is due by Sunday night. So realize that you all are in class Monday through Friday in your schools, but your assignments for this class are due on this Sunday, so keep that in mind. Now, like I mentioned, for no extra points, you're welcome to post your draft to the workshop area in essay 1 and the discussion board area, of course. Okay, so sensory writing. Let's talk about what you are expected to do for the first essay. So this is the first essay assignment of the term. And a sensory essay is basically a descriptive essay. So it's an expression of what the 5 senses experience in a moment of time. So your job will be to write about a specific moment in time utilizing 5 senses details. So what I suggest that you do is describe a moment that has happened recently in order to have it fresh in your mind. A lot of you have already indicated in the discussion board for week 1 that you actually plan on going and taking notes and experiencing that. Like, it's a great idea. So to do this, you can take a trip to a local park or a restaurant, coffee shop. Some of you have decided to just go outside into nature. Some of you want to do something a little bit more involved with a lot of people, and all of those are good ideas. Be sure, though, that you sit and pay attention to the details. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you taste, touch, or smell? And it might be a good idea to take notes. So if you can experience it now before you write the essay, rather than having to rely on memory from times past, probably be a good idea. So you don't have to write a story that doesn't have to have a beginning, middle, and end. It can strictly describe the setting through your 5 senses. So you can use first person perspective, and you should be creative with your descriptions. Try not to be vague, such as using words like nice or pretty. Those are subjective words. They're in the eye of the beholder. So instead, try to use vivid language that paints a picture in the reader's mind. Also, you'll need to be using similes and metaphors and other literary devices. So the format, which I'm going to post a video to the announcements that talks about MLA format, but this should be 1 to 2 pages long, so it needs to be 1 full page of typing double-spaced, or up to 2 full pages of typing double-spaced. It needs to have a title page. That's not part of the 1 or 2 full typing pages. So a title page, and it needs to be in MLA format. I have posted an MLA formatted document to course documents, and like I said, I'll be posting some things to the announcements area as well. So please be sure to type the paper in Times New Roman 12-point font. The margin should be 1 inch all the way around your page, and the whole document should be double spaced. And you need to submit it to the assignments and quizzes area under week 2 as a .doc, a .docx, or a .rtf, rich text format document. I cannot take Google Docs. I know a lot of you with your school computers will have Google Docs. I cannot take that through the classroom, so you need to use these formats, one of these formats. I can open PDF files, but it is kind of a pain. So if you have no way of doing any of these formats, then I will take PDF. I do not like taking PDF, but it's better than nothing. So the final draft, like I mentioned, is due by the end of this week, Sunday night, 11:59 p.m. So let's talk about sensory writing, okay? So here we have a photograph, and it has a lot of beautiful scenery, right? We have mountains and cliff sides and sandy beach and beautiful water. And when we look at this, we can say, yeah, it's really pretty, right? But we're not there. We're not experiencing the sand in our toes. We can't tell if the breeze is cool. We can't experience it. We just look at it. And one of the cool things about writing is that through your language, you can make this photograph more real to your reader than it is just looking at the photograph. Using these sensory details kind of makes a little trick on the reader's brain. But we use our imaginations when we read, and when we read these sensory details, things like the feel of the sand. How did it feel on your toes? Was it cool? Was it hot? Did it have a grainy texture? Was it soft? Was it silky? If we can use these descriptive details, then the reader can imagine what that experience is like, and you can transport them to a place more vividly than a photograph. So when you are describing something in your writing, think about it in terms of your experience. When you experience something, you experience it with all 5 of your senses. You are there in the moment. You have all of your senses available to you, and so that's how you experience it. If I were to give you a slideshow presentation like this and tell you about my family vacation, sure, it might be interesting to see the pictures, but you won't feel like you're there, and oftentimes you bore the people that are watching your pictures. So we want to instead transport the reader into the experience with us. So let's think about how do we do that. So up on the board I have another photograph. So the last one we talked about a beach, but if we look at this apple photograph, what memory does it invoke in you? And one of the ways that we can transport a reader is to share similes, metaphors, experiences that are universal. So if I were to describe an apple, not only do I describe it by sharing details like it's red, it's shiny, it smells crisp, it is mealy, whatever it may be. But when you look at the photograph, think of a memory that it invokes. And for instance, when I look at this photograph, I think of my grandmother. And several years ago, I had the privilege of being able to be with her at the beginning stages of Alzheimer's and help take care of her at the time. And I remember she was at the point where she could do a lot of things, but she didn't remember how to do some basic functions like cooking. She couldn't remember how to cook. And so I would buy groceries before I came. And one time I bought some apples, and she decided it would be a good idea to peel every apple that I brought, thinking that she was going to make a pie. And so I picture my little grandmother. She's 5 foot, she has silvery gray hair and papery wrinkled skin, standing very quietly at the kitchen sink when I get up in the morning, peeling a dozen apples for no reason whatsoever. We weren't making a pie. I don't know how to make pie. So we ate apples all day. But creating that image in your mind through a photograph, you can then invoke that same feeling with your audience by describing what it reminds you of. What does the picture remind you of? Does it remind you of a time making pie? Does it remind you of Snow White. What does it remind you of? And then look at sensory details. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Is it waxy? Is it smooth? Does it have bruises all over it? What does it taste like? Is it crisp and sweet? Is it tangy? What is the taste? What does it smell like? And you can go into words that are very specific descriptions, like it smells sweet. Or you can use metaphors and similes. It smells like my grandmother's kitchen in the fall. So that is a simile that invokes a memory. Sure, you guys don't know my grandmother, but it kind of gives you this understanding that my grandmother liked to bake with apples in the fall. And what does it smell like? What does it sound like? So we're trying to not only create descriptions with vivid details that hit on our five senses, but we also want to invoke these images in our readers' minds with similes, with metaphors, with analogies and stories and narrative. You can use that to create a sense of being in the moment. So a couple things to remember with sensory details. So allow the reader to take part in your action. We've talked a little bit in the discussion board in week 1 about active and passive voice. Taking part in the action means describing it as if the action is happening rather than a faraway kind of description. Practically speaking, we want to avoid using helping verbs, and which are was, were, have, had, has, those types of things, but rather using active language. Create a clear, zoomed in picture. So one of the things is that you're only writing 1 to 2 pages double spaced. And I know that seems like it could be a lot, but it's really not. It's not a lot. So it's not like we're looking for a long story with this essay. So I think of it in terms of a photograph. So or a painting, you could go with painting if you like. But if I were to step outside on my porch, I could take a photograph of the scenery, and you would see a field, you would see brown grasses, you would see the Colorado River, a little town across the river, you would see the backdrop of the Hogback Mountains, you'd see blue skies and a little bit of haze from the smoke that has been traveling this way from California and Wyoming. But you wouldn't see a whole lot of detail. Yes, you'd see all those things. It's a lot. That's a lot to describe. But I couldn't tell you who is standing on the street in the little town across the river. Couldn't even tell you if there is anybody standing there. But if I were to zoom in my lens, I could see the person standing on the street in the little town across the river. I would be able to see the details of their face. I would be able to see the color of their clothing. I would be able to see the wind blowing against their shirt. So by zooming in, although I'm not going to get the whole picture, I will get more specific details that are more engaging than I would with that big landscape. So when you are creating your papers, think of it in terms of zooming in. That's why I said a short moment of time. Rather than describing 5 hours worth of time or 3 days worth of time, we want to try to zoom it in. Rein it in to a small amount of space. So you have ample opportunity to share a lot of descriptive details without having to be bogged down by narrative. We'll talk about narrative later on, but trying to zoom in is going to be important. And try to make your writing interesting. That's why we want to avoid these vague descriptions like nice and pretty. We want to use descriptions that are interesting, that are engaging. Even think about descriptions that you haven't ever heard before. One of my favorite openings to a book comes from Scott Westerfeld's The Uglies. If you haven't read it, you should read it. It's a young adult novel, and it is probably the best description I've ever read. And so at the very beginning of The Uglies, the main character is looking at the sunset and describes the sky as cat puke pink. Now, I don't normally think of cat puke when I think of a sunset, but the way that the author uses that description, it not only gives us an image, which is not pleasant, but it also invokes kind of a feeling, it invokes a mood. So we know that the main character in that book at the very beginning is not in a good mood. I would not describe a sunset as cat puke pink if I were happy. So we get more than just the descriptive detail. We also get a mood from the description, which is really a cool thing you can do with descriptive details. So we try to make the writing interesting. You can use those types of details to convey a mood by the word choices that you have. So include vivid words and phrases, similes, metaphors, and other literary devices to make your writing interesting. So I have a couple of examples. So the first one, okay, it says, obeying orders, I eat my fresh breakfast with a mix of pleasure and apprehension. Fried eggs and hot buttery biscuits are many breaths of fresh air in comparison to the weeks of cornmeal mush and goat's milk. However, I can't help the knots in my stomach from twisting tighter with each anxious bite. So we have several descriptive phrases here talking about eating breakfast. So we have this apprehensive type of idea, that mood, and so we have pleasure, which is you have the hot buttery biscuits and breath of fresh air, but we also have the twisting tighter with each anxious bite to give that idea of apprehension as well. So the next one, softly the sounds of a sad melody stream on the breezes of the windy city. At first the song flew past me as I wallowed in self-pity, yet as suddenly the bard was before me, his dark, nimble fingers pressed and released the keys of the saxophone. I stood there, and the world disappeared. In the middle of the rushed footsteps slapping the pavement, this old man with tattered gloves gathered the city into his rhythm. So with this particular section, you have a couple things. So you have lots of descriptive details: softly, streamed, flew, wallowed. We have dark, nimble. So we have a lot of descriptive detail in this little section, but it also uses alliteration, which is a literary device where we have the same sound at the beginning of words in a sentence or so that also conveys an image. So you look at the first sentence, softly the sounds of sad melodies streamed on the breezes of the windy city. So you get the sense of breeze from the alliteration. So things to keep in mind this week. So use the discussion board to try out new descriptive phrases. Be sure to respond to at least 3 of your classmates' posts in the discussion board. Be sure to take the vocabulary quiz over list 2, which you'll find in the assignments and quizzes area of the course. Turn in your first essay in the assignments area of the course in the sensory essay folder by Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. And then, of course, contact me if you have any questions. I am available via email, text message, all those kinds of things. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and have a great week. Bye.